Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into quite a thought-provoking document.
It certainly is. It covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, it's this personal exploration looking at political and religious opponents, how ideologies evolve, and, well, the pretty fluid nature of symbols today.
It definitely pushes you to think, challenges some assumptions.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack its core arguments, those surprising insights. We'll help you navigate the complex ideas, see what really stands out. Okay, let's get into it.
That's it.
So the author kicks things off, highlighting something pretty profound, I think. The value in actually learning from people you disagree with.
Right. And the example given is quite specific.
Yeah, they talk about listening really intently to a specific Muslim preacher. This was during the time ISIS was really rampant.
And the key insight the author pulls from this preacher, it's how many Sunni Muslims see the 20th, 21st centuries.
How so?
Well, for them, it's perceived as their version of the, quote, end times. And this is deeply linked to the fall of the Ottoman Empire back in 1924.
Ah, the caliphate.
Exactly. That event left Islam without a caliph. So in this view, Islam as a faith, as a political entity, it's seen as headless.
And the author's notes really dig into the gravity of this. They describe secular dictatorships, say Egypt, Syria, Iraq, seen as totally atheistic, degenerate.
Yeah, a real negative view.
And that's contrasted with, say, the Saudis' approach, more rigid, penitent form of Islam, interpreted as like an attempt at reform, maybe, hoping to get restoration through God's favor.
And that context helps understand, or at least frame, the motivations of groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, other similar organizations.
Right.
Their drive to reestablish a caliphate.
Right.
It isn't just politics for them. The author stresses it's seen as absolutely needful in their religion.
And that need extends to territory, too, doesn't it, symbolically?
Hugely important.
The loss of Jerusalem, especially control over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's viewed not just as, like, a military loss, but divine punishment for faithlessness. So recapturing them becomes, again, needful for Islam to be whole again.
Yeah.
It really underlines that spiritual political connection.
So this quest for understanding, learning from opponents, it didn't just stop with religious views. The author's journey then took a, well, pretty unexpected turn.
Where to next?
Finding intellectual refuge, apparently, in the intellectual musings of socialists or communists.
Oh, interesting. Why them?
This was when, according to the author, genuinely traditionalist material got censored online, so they found these socialist writings an unexpected intellectual challenge, even sometimes accidentally correct in critiquing the status quo.
But that didn't last, did it? The author mentions a subsequent disillusionment.
No, it didn't. And the author makes a pretty controversial observation here, stating that many of these figures refuted themselves.
How so? It sounds quite harsh.
It is. The author puts it very provocatively, saying, quote, half of them became transgender, and the rest, without exception, succumbed to other forms of sexual deviancy. We should stress this is the author's controversial perspective. Okay, that's a very strong claim. And the author's interpretation of why this happened.
The belief expressed is that these leftists were ultimately trying to justify, quote, hedonism afforded to them by Western liberalism.
Ah, so embodying Nietzsche's letzter Mensch, the last man, complacent, unaspiring.
Exactly. Instead of the transformative, new communist man they were supposedly aiming for, essentially abandoning, in the author's view, any real vision of a communist paradise.
Okay, quite the critique.
And then comes this really unexpected connection. The author brings in St. Seraphim Rose, the famous statement, pornography is the devil's iconography.
Right, I know the quote.
Yeah.
How does the author link that to modern leftism? It seems quite a leap.
Well, the author's take is quite deep. Initially, they took it metaphorically, but then observed that people, quote, instinctively become that which we view and meditate on.
So like a psychological transformation.
Yeah.
We conform to what we dwell on.
That's the idea presented. So just as Christian iconography, in this view, uplifts the body and soul, pornography, through this lens, conforms the individual to that which it portrays.
I see the parallel the author is drawing now.
So, wrapping up this point, the author's conclusion on modern socialism is that it's become a, quote, cruel, distorted inversion.
An inversion.
Yeah.
Made acceptable within Western liberal capitalism.
Precisely. With its aesthetics, its principles, now actually serving the liberal modernism it once claimed it wanted to fight against. A pretty stark transformation described there.
Indeed.
Okay, moving on. The author then makes this incredibly bold claim, sure to spark debate. Marx and his legacy are dead.
Wow, okay, just dead. How do they argue that?
They break it down. Starting with socialism in the East, the argument is it failed to achieve communism, resulted only in suffering and stagnation.
Right, they mentioned China.
Yeah, noting China had to abandon socialism to preserve its economic viability.
Yeah.
And the Soviet Union, too rigid, couldn't reform, dissolved.
And the legacy in those places now.
Well, the author contends there's no desire to return to socialism in Russia or former Soviet states. Any Soviet nostalgia is, like, abstract, separated from Marx or actual socialist economics.
So even the Russian Communist Party today.
Their policies, the author argues, would be antithetical to the former communists of the USSR, a complete disconnect.
Okay, that covers the East. What about the West? Why does the author say Marxism failed there?
The reason given is quite interesting because there is nothing to aspire to, no action that can be taken which is seen as able to improve the lives of a people.
Nothing to aspire to. That sounds bleak. What's the reasoning?
It ties into the author's view of modern liberalism. They observe that under it, one's people has become the totality of mankind.
So that makes something like Stalin's socialism in one country.
Completely anathema to the liberal Marxist whose duty is now seen as being to the world as a whole. No specific people to uplift in the old sense.
That's a fascinating point about shifting loyalties or scope.
It leads to this really stark comparison. The author acknowledges old socialists had a telos, a purpose. They sought to push humanity forward. And the author, maybe surprisingly, finds that admirable.
Admirable, even if they view the premises as flawed or evil.
Yes. They argue that while the Soviet Union was definitely evil, the ideal of the workers' paradise is still far more noble than American liberalism's notion of freedom and equality.
That's quite a statement. Why is American liberalism seen as less noble, then?
Because, the author argues, it ultimately results in the leveling of culture and sublimation of all to the individual. Everything gets flattened, focused on the self.
Whereas socialism, in contrast,
Sublimates to the collective. And in that collective space, tradition can be both preserved, like in Catholic Poland supposedly, and can be rekindled.
and under liberalism.
The contention is every man is detached from the other and is left to worship his own God. No objective standard or community. No sense of duty.
Wow, so just pure individualism in that critique.
Which leads to the author's incredibly strong, very challenging bottom line for this section. They state that while the USSR was a great evil that needed to be destroyed,
Yes.
America is the greater ultimate evil.
Goodness. That's certainly a provocative conclusion.
Definitely. So, given these collapsing ideologies, these views on liberalism, how does the author see radical forces interacting with the current order? They pivot to assimilation.
Assimilation, how so?
The idea is that Western liberalism managed to assimilate the radical left, render it harmless, even use it as a force defending the liberal order.
And why could it do that?
Possibly, the author suggests, because they share some founding presuppositions, a common ground somewhere deep down.
Okay, but what about the radical right? Does liberalism assimilate them too?
No. Intriguingly, the author claims liberalism has never been able to assimilate the radical right, because fundamentally it repudiates liberalism at its core.
So they remain outside in opposition.
Yes. And the author notes the radical right can sometimes co-opt elements of the radical left, but only where those elements also oppose liberalism.
Any examples of that dynamic?
They even suggest potential for the radical right as great converts to both traditionalism and orthodoxy, citing someone like Dostoevsky as a historical parallel, perhaps.
Okay. This leads into symbols, then.
Exactly. This idea of things being co-opted, changing meaning, leads to the striking concept of symbols being unmoored.
Unmoored, like cut loose from their original meaning.
Precisely. The author cites a Russian commentator, and this is a highly provocative statement, who said that because the Soviets beat Nazi Germany, Russians were somehow free to use Nazi or fascist symbols as, quote, war spoils.
Wow, okay, that's a very controversial take. The author is just reporting this view.
Yes, presenting this commentator's view. The idea presented is that for modern Russians, according to this view, Nazism as an ideology is dead, so the symbols are just objects, unmoored from that which they once represented.
That definitely brings Baudrillard to mind. His ideas about symbols becoming detached, distorted versions of themselves, simulacra.
Right. The author seems to be channeling that kind of thinking, and they give concrete examples of this supposed fluidity.
Such as?
Well, how modern Russians can flaunt Soviet symbols during Victory Day parades. For them, emblems of Russian nationalism, pride, resilience, strength.
Okay, nationalistic reinterpretation.
But then how certain groups the author describes as woke transvestite college students might use the same Soviet symbols.
Right.
But for them, the author argues, these symbols represent a hatred for one's indigenous culture and morality, a completely different meaning.
Okay. And does the author touch on even more charged symbol?
Yes, and again, we need to be clear, this is the author's reporting and analysis. They state that in the hands of certain neo-Nazis, the swastika banner represents misanthropy, defectiveness, and an antisocial disposition. But then the author adds, very controversially, that for others, it may symbolize something noble. It's a deeply uncomfortable point they raise about subjective interpretation.
Extremely. So what's the author's overall conclusion from this exploration of symbols?
They conclude that socialism of the national and Soviet kind are dead, ideologically finished.
But the symbols linger.
Exactly. While the symbols may hold meaning and even value for some, the author argues it's imprudent to judge a person based upon the symbols they adorn themselves with.
Because the meaning isn't fixed.
Right. The individual is the lens by which symbols are interpreted. And the author claims this is sort of already understood regarding symbols like the Confederate battle flag or the Christian cross.
Oh, so.
Pointing out, for example, that a celebrity wearing a cross seldom signifies a genuine faith. It's often just fashion, detached from deep meaning.
I see. The meaning depends entirely on the wearer and the viewer.
Which brings us neatly to a contemporary observation the author weaves in, a statement from Orrin McIntyre on X about El Salvador extending presidential terms.
Oh, yeah. What was the statement?
McIntyre wrote, "Monarchy is coming back. No one will be called king, but kings you will have nonetheless."
And the author's take on that.
They interpret this as a kind of hyper-reality. Remember Baudrillard again, a simulation becoming more real than the original.
So this new monarchy isn't real monarchy.
Not in the author's view. It's detached from what they see as actual monarchy. The temporal simulacra, a superficial copy of God's secular power and authority.
So the symbol, the form is there, but the substance is gone.
Exactly. The type is no longer linked to the prototype, resulting, the author argues, in a soulless state that acts at the expense of the nation and God.
And this ties back to the perversion of symbols.
Yes. The author points out how symbols like the hammer sickle or images of Che Guevara are now ironically used to garner profits to capitalists.
It's the ultimate co-option, perhaps.
Right. And how that which was reserved for kings, like extended power, will be used not to establish and protect divine hierarchy, but rather to defend liberalism, democracy, and equality.
So using the form of tradition to uphold its opposite.
That's the argument. And the author notes this: perversion is only intensified once all pretenses have evaporated, once nobody even pretends it's linked to the old meaning.
This leads to a really profound idea about tradition itself, doesn't it?
It does. The author posits that if a history is forgotten and a tradition lost, its constituent aspects and symbols are free to be adopted by all for whatever purpose.
Just floating free, available for anyone to grab.
Right. Now, they do acknowledge some symbols can be baptized and sanctified, given new purpose while still hearkening back to the past.
But not all symbols.
They contrast this with National Socialism and communism, whose symbols and substance, the author declares, are fundamentally dead. No redeeming them in this view.
But monarchy is different.
Yes, the author emphasizes the symbols and substance of monarchy remains. But, and this is the warning, we risk losing it.
Through what?
Through collective apathy and despondency, simply letting it fade. Because tradition only persists if it is practiced. Symbol can only lose their meaning once they are surrendered. Once lost, a symbol becomes a tool of the masses to define and mold those who still retain and value it. Others get to decide what it means.
That's a powerful warning about preservation.
It leads to the author's final stance in this piece, observing modern communism as just decline and usurpation.
And they also mention the Gottgläubig.
Yes, finding it, quote, fulfilling and cathartic that the Gottgläubig, that Nazi-era group of God believers outside traditional churches, have been disempowered.
Okay. And the final call to action, or belief.
The author's stated belief is that those on the traditionalist right must continue the militant struggle until total victory or earthly defeat.
No compromise.
Apparently not, as in their view, any reconciliation with the modern world will lead only to spiritual death, a very uncompromising endpoint.
Absolutely.
Whoa, what a journey that was. Quite the deep dive, covering so much ground.
Definitely. From learning from opponents to ideologies collapsing east and west.
And this whole shifting, complex, sometimes really troubling landscape of symbols today.
It leaves you with a lot to think about. perhaps a final thought for our listeners.
Please.
In a world where, as the author argues, traditions can be forgotten, symbols can be completely reinterpreted for new, sometimes opposing purposes,
Yeah.
what does it actually mean to uphold an ideal or to connect with the historical movement authentically?
Yeah, how do you tell the difference between real commitment and just adopting the symbol?
Exactly. How do we discern that? And what might thinking about that imply for our own sense of identity, our collective purpose today?
That's a fantastic question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you plenty to chew on.